Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. We've got a very straightforward topic for you today, so let's do it. What's the creepiest thing that you have ever witnessed? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My house is on the side of a highway, and I have windows facing the highway. It was late at night, I couldn't sleep, so I decided to tire myself out by jump roping. Halfway through my session, I took a glance outside, and I saw a man standing on the closest side of the highway staring at me under the lamppost. It felt as if it was something out of a horror movie. Once I saw his creepy silhouette, I immediately just ducked to the ground, and when I looked up, he was gone. To me, now it's a funny situation, as he probably was just some homeless man confused as to why someone was jump roping at like 12 a.m., and when I fell down, he probably bolted, lol. Something that happened to me. When I was around 9ish, I answered the landline phone at our house. The man knew me by name, said he knew my mom, tried to chat with me. I didn't know him and didn't like talking to adults, so I said, "Let me get my mom," and ran to get her. She answered the phone and the man had hung up. A few weeks later, a girl in the grade ahead of me went missing. She'd apparently told her friends that a man contacted her, said he was a friend of her mom's, and was going to pick her up after school to pick a present out for her mom as a surprise. She was kidnapped and murdered. They found her body months later but never caught the man. This was in the early 90s. Turns out, quite a few young girls had gotten the same phone call I had. He seems to have been choosing his victims. The FBI came to my house to ask me questions about that phone call. It still haunts me 30 years later. Still hoping they catch the guy. Absolutely heartbreaking. I was the sole witness to a murder. I've told this story before. I was in a Jeep with the top down, waiting for two guys on the sidewalk to stop arguing. One guy pulls a shank out of his sock and stuffs it, stiff-armed, into the other guy's eye. The crunch was sickening. He took off. I ran up. Blood was spurting out of the dude's face onto the sidewalk in spurts. Long story short, dead by the time the ambulance showed up. I was going to testify in court, but the other dude pled guilty and got 20-ish years, I believe. It was a long time ago. Not long enough for me to forget that sound, though. When I was about 6 or 7, I woke up in the middle of the night to a faint sound of what seemed like someone stacking plates in the kitchen every couple of minutes. With the location of my bedroom door giving me a direct view of the kitchen entrance and part of the kitchen, I opened it and peeked my head to see what was going on. To this day, I swear I remember just seeing some old woman, sunken eyes, gaping mouth completely wide open, head turned almost 90 degrees just staring at me, not even moving. What's even more frightening is the sound suddenly stopping as I did this. While I'm sure it could have just been my eyes struggling to adjust in merely shapes, the longer my eyes adjusted, the more vivid this person became. I just remember staring right back, not moving from what felt like several minutes. I decided to make a break from my parents' bedroom, which was across from my bedroom. I told them what happened and they checked and confirmed nothing was there. Fortunately, we were scheduled for an early flight to visit family, so everyone decided to get up. I'm sure it could have just been the young mind playing tricks, nevertheless. I'll never forget that face. Okay, so this isn't something that I personally saw, but I got quite a few reports about it while working as a camp employee, and the reports definitely creeped me out. It was a summer camp up in the mountains that I worked at for a couple of summers as a teen. Kids attending the camp would sometimes make up stories about seeing Bigfoot or a ghost out in the forest. Typical dumb kid stuff. But there was one type of story in particular that I kept hearing from different groups over several months each summer, which had me a bit worried. The next time I heard of it was from one of the older camp employees recounting a story from many years prior. Apparently his girlfriend at the time was unable to sleep in her cabin because she thought she was being watched by something outside her window. She said it was a very large black crow that would just sit by the window and stare at her, but in a strangely menacing way. Even when the blinds were closed, she'd open the back up hours later and it would still be there staring. She would sometimes see it in the forest, even during the day, sitting between the trees not making a sound or glaring at her, its gaze following her as she walked. She said it was the same crow. She was certain its eyes felt human, according to her. Well, those stories came up every couple of weeks like clockwork. Some kid would one day become distant and quiet, not wanting to leave their cabin for activities. Sometimes they'd ask to go home early. Most wouldn't say why, I think because they knew no one would believe them. But occasionally after prodding, they would admit that they were afraid of something they were seeing in the forest and around their cabin. All of these kids described pretty much the same thing, and it wasn't just kids. Some of the other staff members claimed to have seen something similar as well. It was pretty easy to tell who was bullshitting and who wasn't. The ones who I think really did see something did not want to talk about it. They were very bothered by what they had been experiencing. They'd have awful nightmares, and they wouldn't want to be outside for long. I've seen plenty of crows up there, but they were just crows. They'd flap around, squawk, and shit, and that was it. I don't know why a crow would follow someone or stare at them for hours. That doesn't sound natural at all to me. I don't know what to make of it. It's such a silly story to hear the first time, but after hearing it again and again from people who have no way of knowing about it, you start to wonder, especially after seeing how upset these people are. They didn't seem to be faking it for attention. It ruined their entire week. Well, ravens and magpies are some of the smartest animals there are, so perhaps somebody in the camp slighted them or their family one time and they just remembered and wanted to follow and terrorize anyone that looks like or lives in that area. Or creepy haunted bird. I was living in a rental house 10 years ago. The back door was leading to a narrow enclosure adjacent to which was the neighbor's house. Their bedroom was right next to it. There was a light bulb socket in that small backyard, but I never used that place for anything, so I never put a bulb there. At night, the place always remained very dark. One day, my neighbor told me they could hear movements in my backyard, like someone jumping down from a wall onto the concrete floor. They said it happened on multiple occasions, and they think it was probably a thief. So I bought a CFL bulb and went to put it there. The socket was very high, and I had to stand on a tall wooden stool to reach there. That night before I went to bed, I switched it on. The switch for the bulb was inside my house, and checked the backyard, which was now fully illuminated. The next morning, I didn't go to the backyard and just switched off the light before going to work. On the second night, when I switched it on again before going to bed, there was no light. It remained dark. I tried multiple times, but there was no light. I thought the bulb was defective, but was scared of the dark and the thief, so I didn't go to check that night and decided to check it in the morning. When I went there in the morning, the bulb was not in the socket. First I thought the thief stole it, but then I saw the bulb was on the ground completely undamaged. There was no way it could have survived a fall from that high, and why would the thief wouldn't take a bulb with them? I took the bulb and checked, and the bulb was working fine. I put the bulb back in the socket and went to work. It was the third night, and when I switched on the bulb, it was working. I went to bed. Around 3 a.m., I went to the back door and slightly opened it to see if the bulb was still working. It was pitch dark. I closed the door quickly and went to sleep. Next morning, found the bulb on the ground again undamaged. I avoided going to the backyard as much as possible from that day and didn't attempt to put any bulb there again. There was no incident of theft happened in that neighborhood as far as I know. A large black van with tinted windows following me and the group of other kids I was with, including my little sister. It was winter, I think a no bus day, and Canada, so needless to say, it was snowy. Me and some other kids, including my sister and our babysitters, still wanted to go on a walk, so we put on all our snow stuff and began walking. Well, at one point, my sister points out a black van slowly driving a bit behind us. I think we were a group of 5 or 6, and most of us were around 10 years old, save for my sister, who would have been around 7. We just assumed they were driving slow because of the road and looking for a house, maybe, but we still ran best. And anyone who has tried to run in full winter gear knows how hard it is. We could until we couldn't see the van anymore, and we continue walking. A minute later, my sister points out the van again, and it's pretty much the exact distance behind us that it was before we ran. At this point, we were a little weirded out, but thought we were just walking slow, so it caught up. So we ran again, further this time, and kept looking back. I think I remember looking back and seeing nothing, and looking back a few seconds later to see the van was there again. At this point, we were all freaked out, and I remember just having a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach seeing it again. We all began running like our lives depended on it, because in our mind, they did. My sister was the slowest, and one of the larger and older boys had to pull her along so she didn't get left behind. I remember looking back and seeing the van speeding up a bit, still at a distance, but clearly trying to keep up with us. It felt like we were running for ages, but we finally reached the babysitter's house, ran up the stairs, slammed the door shut, and caught our breath. We told her what had happened, but I don't think she believed us. I remember me and another girl who were in the group saw the same van drive by the window at least once. I think it was twice though. I don't know. It might have been nothing, that our brains twisted into something, but about a decade later, I still can't shake the feeling that the van was bad news and that we were all lucky it noticed in time. Back in college, me and a buddy of mine were very into paranormal stuff and loved researching and investigating supposedly haunted locations. My friend was talking to this girl he liked, and she told him that there's an old abandoned house not too far from her parents' house in this country and that we should investigate it. We were totally down, so one night the two of us and a couple more buddies go to this house. On the way, we pick up this girl and we meet her father, who was a volunteer firefighter, and said that there was a fire in the house that killed the baby of the family that lived there. He helped fight the fire and said that, but afterwards the family just abandoned the place and it has sat vacant for months. We were very intrigued, so we made our way to the house. Once we got there, we confirmed that there was a bad fire and the family just left everything. We make our way through the house and things just start feeling really sad. The girl and the other friends we are with start feeling weird, so they go back to the car. Me and my friend make our way to the baby's room, and once we walk in, we notice a perfectly white wedding dress floating in the room next to the crib, and then all of a sudden, we hear a baby start crying. We're frozen with fear and I literally can't move. The crying continues on for about a minute, and then reality and logic set in, and I start wondering if there's actually a real baby somewhere. We start frantically looking, and I realize that it's coming from under the floor. I rush outside, and as I'm approaching the crawl space under the baby's room, a figure crawls out from under the house and starts running toward me. I'm literally like, what the F is going on? I shine my flashlight at the figure's face and recognize him. It's the father of the girl. It was all a prank. After my heart rate dropped, we laughed it off. Even though it turned out to all be fake, it was still some of the creepiest events I've witnessed firsthand. When I was a kid, maybe about 7, my parents went on a quick store run and left me at home alone, normal in my small country town back then. I was a little rockhound and had a collection that I often enjoyed playing with. As I sat behind our living room couch, our black cat was passing by me, and as it got to the end of the couch, where it could see into the living room area, the cat's hair all stood up straight, and it started hissing aggressively, as if it was either super angry or scared. So naturally, I leaned over to look around the couch, and I see large footprints pressing into the carpet, walking through the living room, down the hall, and into my parents' room. I froze and stayed that way until my parents got home, and of course I told them instantly. They assured me everything was okay, blah blah blah. Maybe 10 years later, I learned that 2 weeks prior to me seeing this, my stepdad had witnessed it as well, when he was home alone. Still gives me goosebumps thinking back to it. This was the first experience of what ended up being several years of being haunted by something. Rough years, man. When I was 14 or so, I was alone in my room. The house phone rang, and my mother answered it downstairs in the kitchen. I still remember everything I heard her say. Hello? Okay. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's awful. Oh, God bless him. Are you okay? Do you want me to come over? I'll come over right now. Okay. I'll see you at church. Thanks for calling. Oh, how awful. I could only hear my mother's side of the conversation. She was really shocked and upset. I heard her climb the stairs to my room, and suddenly in one single instant, I went from being confused to absolutely clear on what happened. It was like a fact just appeared in my mind as if I remembered the spelling of a word. David hung himself in his bathroom. My mom knocked on the door and opened it, in tears in her eyes. I was sitting at my desk and looked up at her and said, David hung himself in the bathroom. And she immediately started panic crying and asking me how I knew. David was the guy from my church. I didn't know him very well, but my mom was friends with his mom. He hung out with my brother sometimes, but he went to a different school. He was about 16 or 17. I had no idea he was depressed. He was just a guy who I sort of knew. I had to talk to a social worker or something who was working with David's family about it because my mother was convinced I knew something about it, but I didn't. My mother didn't say his name on her side of the phone conversation. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation. I just suddenly knew. I have no idea why or how this happened. I've never had another instance like that since. I used to work the graveyard shift at a Holiday Inn in a nearby town. For those of you that don't know, most small hotels will have the front desk receptionist do laundry overnight, so all bedsheets, towels, etc. are ready for the housekeeping team the next morning. One night, we had been at max capacity, and we had piles and piles of laundry to wash, dry, and fold. One of our plastic carts was filled with wet, dirty towels, so as you can imagine, the cart itself was heavy. As I was folding the clean laundry, I just see the laundry cart start rolling a few feet, almost as if someone was pushing the cart. Mind you, when these carts are full, they can be a little hard to push. They require strength to push even more so if the sheets or towels have water. The cart kept rolling for a few seconds more, and it just stopped. I couldn't believe what I just witnessed. I remember telling the housekeeping manager the next morning of my experience, and she responded with, "Oh, so you've met our shy ghost?" Needless to say, I switched to the day shift a few weeks later. Far be it from me to speculate or debunk a story that I was not there for, but it is a cart, and it does have wheels, so maybe it just started rolling, maybe some of the weight was shifted forward, I don't know, or, shy ghost. Looking back, this was extremely creepy, but it wasn't at the time. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, was baptized at age 12 to JWs. Baptizing means you have dedicated the rest of your life to following JW rules. By the time I turned 15, I knew I wouldn't be happy as a JW and started to rebel. I got a boyfriend at school, and when my parents found out, they immediately brought me to the elders. In my case, the group of elders were 4 men, all above the age of 45. My dad had to be in the room with me because I was a minor. At one of about 5 meetings, they were trying to get me to admit to premarital sexual acts because that would be grounds for punishment. I lied and told them that I had only made out and touched or been touched outside of the clothes. The elders proceeded to ask me questions like, was there tongue? Who touched who? How long? How many seconds or minutes did you touch each other? Did either of you orgasm? I was 15 years old, and my father was in the room, waiting for these answers just like the elders. What's the creepiest to me about this is that it took me 3 full years to realize just how creepy and disgusting this interaction was. At the start of this year, there was an article in our local newspaper about a school director and former teacher that were accused of sharing and uploading child porn, rape, and child abuse. 2 days later, my mom calls me because it was my former teacher and choir master, and she had received a call from the police asking for my contact info to question me. Before that, I talked to a friend about potential victims because we both have known that person and were active singers. I tell the police the names of the suspected victims by once and get invited some weeks later to make a statement. Because our fears were actually true, and one actually was a victim, they asked about a suspected time span. Because the person's age was still in the range of abuse of a minor, which is way harder than only child abuse in our law. I wanted to vomit, but that shit doesn't stop there. About a month later, I talked to my parents about that, and they mentioned that it has become more or less public knowledge that he used narcotics, and there are probably a lot more victims. After swallowing that pill, I remember that I slept in a room with that guy when I was in primary school, and we were on a trip with our choir. I have almost no memories of that trip. I don't know what happened. All I know is that my mind is effed up since I thought about that. And to top it off, the choir was Catholic, and the church didn't do an effing thing about it. Damn. This entire situation and scenario is horribly tragic, and I'm sorry you went through that. And that nothing ultimately was done about it shows the hypocrisy of that organization. I had a baby monitor that would turn on whenever the baby made enough noise or moved enough to activate it. When it turned on, there would be this little click just a moment before the video feed turned on. Baby cried a lot, so the monitor was always at hand. She cries, I go up and put the binky in her mouth and hold it in place for a few minutes until she settles back down. One night I'm home alone, and the thing clicks. I grab it, and the video turns on a half a second later, and I see my baby in her crib with a hand reaching out holding the binky up to her mouth, and then the hand disappears. I freak out and run upstairs, and there's nothing there. Baby is a bit fussy. I settle her down, and as I settle her down, I realize that it had been my arm that I saw. You see, when the stupid thing activates, the first frame of the video is the last frame from the last time the thing was turned on. Normally, it wouldn't turn off while we were there with her because our motion kept the video feed active. For some reason this time, it had turned off while I was setting her down, and the next time it turned on, the first frame of the video was from my hand holding her binky in place. Knowing what it was helped, but I was running hot the rest of the night. I don't know if I've ever experienced that level of sheer terror in my life, and even to this day, knowing that nothing actually happened, I get a little freaked out by the memory. When I was 9, I used to sleep over regularly at my friend's house. We played video games all night and drank Mountain Dew Code Red and just did silly 9-year-old stuff. At the time, my friend's mom had a new boyfriend. He was quiet and spent most of his time in the bedroom watching movies or sleeping. One day, my friend and I went to sleep early, as we had stayed up the previous night. I typically just slept in the same bed as him, but that day I stayed in his stepbrother's, not the son of my friend's mom, boyfriend, room, since he wasn't there. In the middle of the night, I felt someone lying next to me, and I thought it was my friend and shoved him because I was mad he woke me up. He got out of my bed and left the room. Then I heard weird sounds coming from my friend's room, and I thought he was crying because I shoved him too hard. So I went to see if he was okay and found the boyfriend naked in my friend's bed. As soon as the boyfriend saw me, he ran up to me and said if I told anyone, my friend would get in big trouble. I talked to my friend the next day, and whatever it was, I didn't understand what was going on at the time, has been going on for some time. I convinced my friend to ask his mom why her boyfriend was such a weirdo, being quiet all the time and walking around naked at night and coming into our rooms. We asked her together, and I remember the color draining from her face. After that, I talked to some counselor person at school, and they asked me a bunch of questions that I don't remember anymore. My friend switched school shortly after that, and I think the boyfriend went to jail. Now that I understand what happened, it's terrifying to think about, and the experience of peering into the hallway into my friend's room and hearing the whimpering noises haunts me to this day. Also, remembering the feeling of the boyfriend's fleshy mush when I shoved him on the bed makes me wince.